This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The gates of hell, is that a literal physical portal? Yeah, sort of, but also can be wherever you are. Welcome to Iron and Myth, our monthly discussion here on A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Please take a moment, if you haven't yet, download our free app to your smartphone or tablet. We've also got versions for your smart TV, whether it's Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Google TV, Android TV. We got all the TVs. Just go to their app store, find the Gilbert House Ministries app, download it to your device, and that way we will be there on your schedule. Of course, your mobile device has some additional features as well, and you can find that at gilberthouse.org/app. Joining us for our monthly discussion, the usual crew here for Iron and Myth. We welcome, as we go around the horn from top left, well, that's me. Top right, that would be the best-selling author and award-winning screenwriter Brian Godawa. Bottom left, you've got author and pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, Doug Van Dorn. And bottom right, the man who will not be moving during this conversation, but he is with us vocally and with his mind, and that's all that we need. It is Dr. Cowbell. You go back and watch last month's program to get that joke. He is the founder and a senior fellow of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, Dr. Judd Burton. Fellows, welcome. And this month, as we've the last couple of months been going through a sort of Iron and Myth Book of the Month Club, it is finally my turn. We're going to discuss The Gates of Hell, Sharon's and my most recent book, officially released last October, really got the push on Skywatch TV just a few weeks ago. And just, I guess, as an opening statement, the reason we wrote this book, which builds on research that we've been doing for a while. People have read some of our earlier works will notice that we recover some of the same ground. We never want to assume that somebody who's picking up one of our books has read the previous books and is familiar with that material. But The Gates of Hell, obviously from the Gospel of Matthew, the location that, well, Judd, I have to credit you with inspiring, and that interview with Dr. Future, I think around 2006, where I heard you first discuss Caesarea Philippi and why that was so important, because it had never occurred to me previously that the gates of hell was a physical place. I'd always thought, okay, this is just a figure of speech. Jesus was being colorful, making a point about his redemption, or the redemption that he was offering us from the spirit realm, not realizing that he had walked his guys 30 miles across rough terrain in sandals, and possibly in the month of February, to make a specific spiritual point at Caesarea Philippi in front of the gates of hell. But as we've studied and researched over the years, Sharon and I also believe that those gates can exist wherever we are if we open ourselves up to the spirit realm. And that's why the book not only goes into the history of trying to contact the spirit realm before the time of Jesus, going back to the prehistory and focusing on the land around ancient Israel, the Golan Heights, Bashan, the ancient kingdom of Bashan, and some of the people who may have brought those practices there, and specifically the Hurrians, the Hurrites of the Bible. But in the present day, certain practices that seem to be attempts by us in the present day to open ourselves up to the spirit realm, open those gates up, and even in the future, and the role that artificial intelligence may play in that. So our purpose in writing the book was to show that this has been a very ancient practice, this attempt to reach entities, some of which may be those described by Peter and Jude as being in chains in gloomy darkness until the judgment, the sons of God who had rebelled and were punished in the days of Noah, the Watchers, the sons of God from Genesis 6, but others who are still with us to this day, demons, fallen angels, what have you. There are a lot of people who, whether they realize it or not, are opening themselves up to these entities. And with this book, we just wanted to make that case that, yes, the gates of hell was a literal place. Jesus walked his guys there and was not just a day trip to make a specific theological point, but those gates can be with us wherever we are if we open ourselves up to the spirit realm. So that's the elevator pitch, if you will, rather long one, but that's That's me in a nutshell. As my dad used to say, if you ask Derek for the time, he tells you how to build a watch. So,
Derek, I think for me, it might be a good question to ask you. Is this book something that you would say fits, because you brought it up a little bit in your introduction there, that it fits as in any kind of a way with your other books, other than just development? Because you've written a lot on this stuff, and I think it would be helpful for people to just get an idea of how this book relates to the previous stuff that you've written.
Yeah, it really does develop from the other books. We included a section, and it's even hinted at in the subtitle here, Unlocking the Ganymede Code, which is a reference to the apotheosis of Washington, which is the painting on the inside of the U.S. Capitol, which again may seem really far afield from where we're starting. If we're talking about Jesus at the base of Mount Hermon in front of this big cave that was believed to be the entrance to the netherworld, what's the United States Capitol have to do with that? I went into that in great detail in my previous book, The Second Coming of Saturn. In our book, Veneration, Sharon and I did a deep dive into the Nephilim and the Rephaim and how they were venerated by the Canaanites who lived around ancient Israel, and how the Rephaim, or the Rapayuma in the Ugaritic language, were venerated as part of their pantheon, their religion. How even in northern Syria there have been some artifacts discovered that seem to indicate the existence of the Rephaim as sort of a middle tier in the spirit realm between humanity on the lowest level and the great gods like Baal, Baal, Astarte, etc. on the top level. In the middle appears to be this group called the Rapayuma. And we wanted to dig into that because, for one thing, it's, I think, clear when we've started digging into this, and thanks to the work of Dr. Michael Heiser through the Unseen Realm and Reversing Hermon, that they were not a fringe element of Jewish or Christian theology, but they're central to it. But we didn't want to dig into the stuff that Mike had already done, and at the same time, we didn't want to go in the direction of guys like L.A. Marzulli. And I love L.A., and sometimes he gets really speculative, but I credit him for having the courage to go out there and put his own reputation and resources on the line to try to establish the fact that these giants did exist at some point in the past, and that they were affecting humanity all throughout our history. What we did in Veneration especially, and this is developed further with the archaeology that we include in here, about the what we believe to be the actual location of Jesus' baptism as a sort of declaration of war against these spirit beings, the demons that are still with us, was to say, look, these guys are covering this territory. Mike has done this. We are not the scholars that Mike Heiser was, but these are things that we can research that haven't been done yet. There are plenty of ancient texts that show that the neighbors of ancient Israel included the worship of the Rephaim spirits in their daily lives. And a lot of what's in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, is in response to that, if you dig deeply enough into the Hebrew. So I think those are the two books that probably are the ones on which we draw the most, Veneration and The Second Coming of Saturn for this book. But we tried to include some new information as well, specifically regarding where Jesus was baptized and why, and some of the practices like, the trips to South America to drink ayahuasca tea with a shaman to try to, get into that spirit realm.
Well, first of all, I got to say, Derek, for your words about scholars, your level of writing and scholarship counters any scholarship I've read anywhere else. So I just want to, give you some kudos. When I read you, I'm so impressed, and I think, man, I suck when it comes to scholarship. And the way you quote it and weave it together. And I say that, to encourage you, but also for the listeners to know that, when you read this book, and particularly thinking of the ancient world, which is what I write more about, it's you're really you're not getting just speculation. And now you may not agree with the interpretations, but Derek and Sharon do an excellent job of not just quoting other researchers, but actual scholarly, respectable people, whether it's Amar Anus or some of the older guy archaeologists from the past and such. So good on you for that, man. And you have actually helped me to see this aspect of the Reframing in a much fuller way than I had before. So thank you for that. I guess the one question I would like to ask you is, well, I've got a few, but I'm gonna start with the beginning for the sake of our listeners. Could you sort of, you start out. It's a very good progression of ideas. Your chapters are brilliantly short, concise, but power packed with information. I really appreciate short chapters because sometimes, when you read long chapters on scholarship, you get tired, but you keep it going. So all that's really good. But I wanted to, you address, of course, in the beginning, laying some of the basics of the Nephilim and the Reframing, and the being the spirits of the dead Nephilim and the demons and all that stuff that our listeners are very familiar with. We've talked about it before. So you lay the great groundwork. But then when you start to go into the portals or the realm, the Ove, and could you explain to us a little bit of that foundational element of the Ove as the sort of the touch point between those two worlds of the dead and the living?
Yeah, the Ove is it's transliterated from Hebrew into English as OB, but it is pronounced Ove. And I credit you with this, Brian, because this was in your novel about David, in King Saul visiting the Baalat Ove, the mistress of the Ove, the night before he died, and that one of the giants of the Philistines, whom David and his men later had to take out, Ishvi ben Ov. I'd always read it like an American guy, Ishbi ben Ab. But Ishvi ben Ov, Ishvi, son of the Ove. The word Ove derives from a Hurrian word. Again, these are the Horites of the book of Genesis. The Hurrians are an ancient people that can be traced back to the plain of Ararat, which is interesting. They had a unique style of pottery, so archaeologists can say, yep, that's where they started, and this is where they moved, and they got to Canaan by around the year 2250 BC. Very unique style of pottery, helps them trace exactly where they moved and when they got there. The Hurrians were all throughout the land of Canaan. At the time the Israelites got there, they'd already been there for a while. The guy from whom David bought the plot of land on Mount Moriah, which later became the site of the temple, now the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, was named Arana. Arana is a Hurrian word that means Lord. He was essentially the Hurrian leader of the Jebusites. And for all we know, Jebusite could be a tribal name from a Hurrian group. We don't know. But the Hurrians had a practice had a necromantic practice that involved a thing called the Abi, A-B-I. And it was a ritual pit where they would dig down into this pit, descend to it. They would scribe a magic circle on the floor, sacrifice a small animal like a piglet or a lamb or sadly a puppy. And then they would summon entities from the netherworld and ask for favors and then send them back to the netherworld, the great below. This practice was clearly brought with them, and again, archaeologists have traced this through a city called Urkesh, which is why there's a couple of chapters on Urkesh in the book. That Urkesh, by the way, may be Ur-Kasdim, Ur of the Chaldees, from which Abraham traveled to Canaan. There are some scholars who think that is etymologically possible, but certainly Abraham came from northern Mesopotamia and not from Sumer. Anyway, this practice is documented at Urkesh. They found a ritual pit that goes down about 40 or 45 feet. They could only excavate down about halfway because of concerns that the pit would fall in. But scholars have been able to trace through texts preserved by the Hittites, who were centered, their kingdom was centered in what is now the center of Turkey. They preserved a lot of the Hurrian religious texts. And so we know what the Abi was used for. Again, it was this practice of summoning spirits from the netherworld. Well, that's exactly what Saul did through the Baalat Ov, which is usually translated the medium of Endor. But the New English translation, the Net Bible, and I stumbled across or was led to it by the Lord, I look at the Net Bible alongside the ESV because the translators of the NET provided their translators' notes. And this really was a key that unlocked a big door on the previous book, The Second Coming of Saturn, when I read that chapter and found that the Net Bible translates, rather than medium or witch of Endor, they translate it as owner of a ritual pit. Like, wait a minute, what? And in their notes, they referenced a scholar named Harry Hofner, who wrote a paper on this back in 1966, arguing that the Hebrew word ov derives from the Hurrian word abi, which also happens to be the origin of the Sumerian word abzu, from which we get the English word through the Greek, the word abyss. So so whenever you encounter the word medium in the Hebrew, the Old Testament, that word ov derives from the ancient Hurrian practice of summoning spirits from the netherworld, usually through a ritual pit dug into the earth.
Wow. Very helpful.
Mind-blowing. Yeah, mind-blowing when you get into it. And again, Ishvi ben Ov and your plot device of making Ishvi the son of the woman who owned the ritual pit visited by Saul the night before he died. Great plot device.
Yeah. So you're establishing this connection between the worlds, the pit. Are there any other, as a portal or a gateway, right? Are there any other portals or gateways beyond that?
Well, yeah, one that we actually went to. I mean, we argued that, or I argue in the book because I wrote the chapter that Babel is such a portal, and that the site of Babel is not Babylon because there's some archaeological reasons for it. The dating doesn't work, but anyway, argue that it was at the ancient city of Eridu, which was remembered by the Sumerians as their very first city, where kingship first was brought down from heaven. There's a temple there to the god Enki, which is a compound word that means Lord of the Earth. This temple was called the Iabzu, or House of the Abyss, where he was believed, Enki that is, to live in this underground watery reservoir from which the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates River flowed. In Mesopotamia, given that those were the two main sources of fresh water, they're pretty important to, human survival. There is a poem that was preserved in Akkadian, found at the site of Babylon, called Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. Enmerkar was a king of the powerful city of Uruk. And in this poem, he's trying to compel a king of a kingdom called Arata. Nobody agrees as to where it is, but it's probably, I think, a reference to Urartu or Ararat, which are the mountains in Armenia, which, Judd, I know we've talked about this before, as the Sumerians remembering that was where they came from, the land between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which is where the ark came to rest. Well, Eridu, being an ancient city and being very important to the theological, spiritual center of Mesopotamia, was important even when it was no longer politically important, even down to the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Kings of Babylon were still referring to themselves as the king at Eridu. Hammurabi, who established the great kingdom of Babylon in the 18th century BC, was actually crowned at Eridu, which is about 400 miles away. So, I mean, it was very important. But this poem, this king of Uruk was going to use these building materials that he wanted to get from Arata to rebuild or to build a gleaming mountain as an abode of the gods at Eridu. So what he was trying to do, apparently, was to turn this temple to the god Enki directly above the Abzu, the abyss, into an artificial mountain as a point of contact, a portal between the gods in the great below and humanity. Yes, there were still gods who were meeting on the tops of mountains, but this would have been still within memory of people, well, not living memory, but there were still tales of the gods who once walked amongst the earth. And again, the Hurrians, who came from the original homeland of the Sumerians, had this very ancient practice of digging into the earth to summon gods from the netherworld. So that is my argument there, that Babel was a portal of this type, digging into the earth to communicate with gods on the other side, if you will, of the gates of hell. But we also see this in Canaan. Doug, you were with us when we visited and spent a day with the archaeologist who's done the most recent dig at Gilgal Rephaim, the Wheel of the Giants, or Israel's Stonehenge, where, according to Dr. Mike Freakman, a shaman, and this dates back to like 3800 BC, give or take, would go into the central core, which is sort of an artificial netherworld, possibly having taken some sort of psychoactive substance or some sort of primitive beer to alter his state of consciousness and, again, communicate with spirits in the netherworld. So you've got these, and of course, all over the Golan Heights, ancient kingdom of Bashan, you've got these megalithic monuments to the cult of the dead in the form of dolmens and tumuli, which are big piles of rocks, many of them covering up dolmens, which look like tables in their simplest form. Two big slabs of rock standing vertical, and then a tabletop slab across the top. And we also visited, while we were there, the Shamir dolmen, which is the one that's got a 50-ton capstone, like two fully loaded 18-wheelers on top of these vertical slabs. There was a lot of effort that was put into these monuments dedicated to the spirits of the dead, but also to communicating with the spirits coming up from the earth. And it was well known down to the time of Jesus and beyond in the Holy Land.
Dr. Cowbell would like to speak.
We see your hand raised.
Derek, it's interesting to me that so much of this loops back to Turkey. And of course, you've laid out the case well for Arkesh as being the of Abraham. I feel like you've covered some new ground in these connections to Turkey, and certainly clarifying some issues like the Avi and the origins of Ov. It seems like there are a host of at least ideas about entities associated with the underworld that disseminate from that region of the world. One of my side projects that I've not been able to get back to is an etymological breakdown of the word vampire, and its many iterations, which I've come to believe is connected with the actual word Avi, Ov, because the words for vampire like Upir and Upiri are more common than say words like Nosferatu or Verkoslak, but they all share this initial morpheme with the vowel and the bilabial P or B sound, or V sound in some cases. My question is, why Turkey, why ancient Anatolia, and why this part of ancient Anatolia?
That's a really good question, and I think that's something we need to put our heads to, because when you look at that part of Turkey, and you've got Göbekli Tepe not far from there, a little to the north and east from there, you've got the Dürüpünar site, which there are some now who are saying, hey, look, we've got some new evidence that adds to the weight of the argument that is the landing place of Noah's Ark. But certainly the plain of Ararat would be where the survivors from the ark would have descended and begun to, plant and farm and what have you. The oldest known domesticated wheat comes from that area. I mean, I guess it's the same question we'd ask with Göbekli Tepe. Why that area? Why that part of Turkey? In the previous book, The Second Coming of Saturn, when I traced the entity that I argue was Shemyaza, the Roman god Saturn, back to his Hurrian counterpart, Kumarbi, the evidence points to that part of Turkey. I mean, Urkesh was a city that was sacred to Kumarbi. But there are some other areas in northern Syria along the border with what is now Turkey that may have lent its name or their names to the name of this particular entity. So again, why there? I don't have an answer to that question, to be honest. I think it's interesting that the scholar Edward Lipinski, who wrote a really important paper years back called The Abode of El, looking for where the Canaanite father god El, who we just sort of take for granted because, okay, the Canaanite literature says Mount Hermon was important and El was there with Asherah. Dr. Lipinski years ago did a deep dive study into it. Is this really what that ancient literature says? And he found that there were actually 2 locations, possibly 3, that were really important to this entity called El. One of them being Mount Hermon, of course, which he referred to as the Canaanite or the Semitic Olympus. He also pointed to Mount Zaphon as being sacred to El before Baal emerged as the king of the pantheon. But then he also pointed to the mountains of Armenia, which would mean that El, at some point in the distant past, prior to the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Middle Bronze Age, would have found a home in that part of Armenia, which is, again, where the ark came to rest. But again, that's also where Kumarbi, who was El by a different name, originated. He was part of that group of people who came out of the mountains, the Taurus Mountains and the mountains of Armenia, the Taurus Mountains of Turkey, and moved south with the Hurrian people, the Horites, as they spread westward into Anatolia and then southward into Syria, Lebanon, and then Canaan. So again, why? I don't know.
Derek, I kind of want to return to the portal question for a minute. I'll set this up. I think that it fits pretty well, your title of your book, Gates of Hell. And when we were out there, and we went to this place that nobody knows about, but that you discovered, you had found it in some paper, I think.
Dr. Freakman's.
Gilbert Batah. Yeah. And this is a place just north of the Sea of Galilee, about a mile, right off the Jordan River, kind of almost before the delta of the Jordan going in. And you found a paper that tied Jesus' baptism perhaps to that area. And then when you were, I think, reading Dr. Freakman's dissertation, and maybe even then we discussed it with him, he had found a couple of petroglyphs there at that place of, it was a serpent and a fish.
Right.
And when I was preaching through Luke about a year ago, and I was thinking about Jesus, the story of the feeding of the 5,000, which may very well have been within eyesight of where Jesus was baptized, I came across the Targum of Psalm 23 that I want to read, and add one little thing that the Midrash says, and I think this will show people that there's a lot going on here that is related to your book, and then I want to ask the question. So this is what the Targum of the Psalm says. Psalm 23, we all know the Psalm. It says, "It is the Lord who fed his people in the wilderness, they lacked nothing. In a place of thirst, he makes me rest among the beauty of grass. Beside gentle waters, he leads me." And right there, I think John in, I think it's John 5 or 6, I think it's John 6, he's riffing off the grass, the green grass stuff, I think from Psalm 23, making a direct connection there to the feeding of the 5,000. He restores my soul with manna, is what it says. And that's so interesting because in John 6, Jesus is feeding the people. That's the whole manna discourse, right? I am the manna come down from heaven. Mm-hmm. he leads me in the way of righteousness for his name's sake, even when I go into exile in the valley of the shadow of death. And you could talk about that if you want. Like, there's a lot here you can go off, okay? I will not fear evil because your memra, your word, your logos, an old Aramaic idea that Dr. Heiser believed really was talking about the second power in heaven, Christ. Your memra is my support. Your straight staff and your law, they comfort me. You spread a table before me. Now, the Midrash says the table of the flesh of Leviathan. So they're actually eating on the flesh of Leviathan there, is the idea. Manna is raised up in front of my oppressors. You make my body fat with stout birds, and the head of my priests with the anointing oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, when I shall dwell in the house of the sanctuary of the Lord for length of days. Okay, so there's so many wild things possibly going on here with Jesus feeding the 5,000 in sight of possibly his baptism. Now, you make the argument that Jesus' baptism was not down south, it was up north, and very few people have seen this, and I think it's just so brilliant, and the cosmic geography of this is fascinating. And so here comes my question. It has to do with going back to what Brian was asking about portals, and the idea of Jesus' baptism somehow mirroring or imaging or being a portal, a spiritual idea of Jesus' descent into hell, which you make that connection. And so I guess my question is, do you think it's fair to say that you would in some way link Jesus' baptism almost to a portal in that way? And then the second part would be, what does the cosmic geography of Jesus' baptism then have to do with the connection to Jesus' descent into hell? I think people would really find this really interesting. So,
well, I think, and I would direct people to go back to the discussion we had on a previous program about the Upper Galilee and Bashan and the cosmic geography there. But yeah, I mean, clearly in John chapter 1, which is where the geographic clues come from, that seem obvious when you look at it. John chapter 1, beginning of verse 21 or 19, really, where he's confronted by representatives from the religious hierarchy in Jerusalem, asking him, why he's doing what he's doing and by what authority. And in verse 28, it says, these things took place in Bethany across the Jordan where John was baptizing. 2,000 years later, no one's ever found a Bethany east of the Jordan River, which is what that phrase across the Jordan means. But in 1874, somewhere around there, I forget, I've got the date in the book, a scholar, military men, but the Palestine Exploration Fund used a lot of military men to go out and do archaeology. The Ottoman Empire was collapsing. They were also sending reports back to the Home Office or the Foreign Office, just what they could take when the Ottomans finally collapsed. Anyway, Lieutenant Claude Condor had been looking for the site of Jesus' baptism and was at first thought it was a site near Beth Shan, south of the Sea of Galilee. But then 4 years later, he returned to it and said, nope, the oldest and best manuscripts of the Gospel of John say it's Bethania in Greek. And he said, it makes sense if we don't think of it as a city, but as a region. And Bethania is just a Hellenized or Greek form of the Latin name Botania, which is Bashan. Yes, Bashan across the Jordan. Okay, well, that makes sense. And then especially when you continue on, verse 29, the next day, John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And he describes that he saw, John says in verse 32, I saw the Spirit descend from heaven like a dove, and it remained on him. Now, from the other Gospels, we know when that happened. That was when Jesus came up out of the water after being baptized. So in that sense, there was that portal there at that location where heaven opened, the Spirit came down. Father sends the Spirit to the Son right there. The next day again, John is standing with two of his disciples, and Jesus comes by, and John says, behold, the Lamb of God. One of those disciples, Andrew, runs home to get his brother Peter. Now, we know from the the following verses that Andrew and Peter and Philip, the third disciple called, are from Bethsaida, which is north of the Sea of Galilee. And in fact, it's about half a mile from this megalithic structure similar to Gilgal Rephaim, the same construction, massive circles of stone around a central tumulus. Kerbet Beteha, in fact, means in Arabic, ruins of Bethsaida. And as we saw when we were there with Doug and his wife Janelle, there is the bank of the river slopes down from the very edge of this structure. In fact, some of it is rolled down the slope. How far would you say, Doug? 7,500 feet?
Down? So now not 7,500.
No, 75 or 100?
Yeah, 75 or 100 feet. Yeah, sure.
So, and it's quite a long area there, maybe quarter of a mile or so, where you could definitely get hundreds, if not a couple thousand.
Oh, yeah.
Sitting there watching somebody down there at the river preaching and or baptizing. So given the location, the proximity to Bethsaida, and the perfect spot there when you look up and down the river, that's the best location in that vicinity to have a whole bunch of people there baptizing, and as you later preached on the Gospel of Luke, perhaps feeding a whole bunch of people, sitting there in this natural theater with this giant monument to the cult of the dead and to summoning spirits of the dead from the netherworld. Mm-hmm. Jesus being baptized right there. I mean, it's like step one of reversing Hermann. Okay, step one, I'll go here and I'll get baptized, and the Spirit will descend right here at this ancient. Because if that structure there near Bethsaida is as old as Gilgal Rephaim, it was about 3,700 years old by the time Jesus went there. I mean, that's like from the time of Abraham to us having this conversation practically. When you think about it, that's how long those things had been there by the time Jesus walked the earth. And he goes there for his first mission. Okay, I'm going to be baptized to show obedience to the Father. Boom, portal right there at a site that, well, why was it there on the river? I don't know, but Dr. Freakman, it was his dissertation, had to run it through Google Translate to get it from Hebrew into English, which made for some really interesting word choices. But that's where we got the pictures of the petroglyphs of the fish and the one showing a serpent, apparently. And it's very interesting you mentioned that Targum, feasting on Leviathan.
Yeah.
Because in Psalm 68, there is a reference there which refers to Bashan, beginning at verse 15, O mountain of God, or more probably, according to Mike Heiser, or mountain of gods, Har Elohim, mountain of Bashan. This is a reference to Mount Hermon, O many-peaked mountain, mountain of Bashan. Then you go down to verse 22, and it says, the Lord said, I will bring them back from Bashan. I will bring them back from the depths of the sea. Now, scholar Nicholas Wyatt, who we cite in almost every single book, he's an expert on the Ugaritic literature, writes a lot on the Old Testament. He translates it this way, from Bashan I shall bring back from the depths, Yam, bearing in mind that Yam in Ugaritic was the name of Leviathan. It's the Hebrew word that means sea, but that name in Ugaritic was applied to the fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, which Isaiah quoted in Isaiah 27, verse 1, referring to Leviathan. So in Bashan, you've got this giant serpent-shaped structure, the Serpent Mound of Bashan, which you, Doug, get credit for first finding on Google Earth. And perhaps the reason that whole region was referred to as Bashan, I didn't realize until about 2 years ago, that Bashan is just the Hebrew form of the Akkadian name Bashmu, which was the seven-headed chaos serpent that was defeated in battle by the warrior god Ninurta.
That's wild. I don't know what Judd might think of this, but as soon as you said that, my mind went to basilisk.
The basilisk.
In the Greek language.
Yeah.
So, yeah, wild.
So Bashan, this place of the serpent, is not just the place of the serpent, it's a place of the chaos dragon. And here in Psalm 68, you got Yahweh saying, I will bring them back from Bashan, which is nowhere near the sea. It's 50 miles inland. I will bring back from the depths Yam, or Leviathan. Why from Bashan? Because maybe that's where chaos was first subdued. Now that's speculation. That is going way, way out there. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned that Targum with the 23rd Psalm. Sharon has done presentations on the 23rd Psalm, and she pointed out with a picture of your standard issue trilithon dolmen, two slabs like this and the tabletop. And of course, the word dolmen is from a Celtic language, Brittonic, that means table. And if you think, and we're going to argue this, in fact, in a future book and a video, if I ever finish the editing, that the valley through which the Jordan River runs between Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee is the valley of the shadow of death. Mm-hmm. Because there are 1,100 of those dolmens that have been found so far on either side of that valley. A big number of them at Shamir, where we saw that one with the 50-ton capstone, but another block of them at Chorazin, which was one of the cities that Jesus condemned. And it's just the other side of the river and a little closer to the Sea of Galilee from where we saw that megalithic structure, Herbet Beteha. Anyway, when Jesus moved to Capernaum, where the Jordan enters into the Sea of Galilee, according to Matthew, it was to fulfill what the prophet Isaiah had written, that those dwelling in darkness and those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned.
You can't see my smile right now, but I'm grinning ear to ear because I was trained by a lot of the archaeologists who dug at those sites, Chorazin, Capernaum.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Dr. Vasilius Seferis and the late George Knight.
Well, fascinating stuff that whole area is just covered with these megalithic structures. And Jesus specifically went there. I mean, I never thought about this until we started digging in this and started pulling on the thread of the Reframing, which is why each of our books seems to have a little bit more in it. Even going back to my first book, the Great Inception. And I learned after that one, Brian, why you don't want to write really, really long chapters, because they are harder to read. Carl Gallups gave me some really good advice on it. Make them so that you can read them in about 5 minutes. People will take them into the reading room. You get the picture, and they can read a chapter, then set it down and come back later. And anyway. But it's also easier on the guy who has to do the audiobook version, I've learned. But as we pull on this thread, more of it makes sense, and we see why Jesus went to Capernaum, which is on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, to base his ministry, instead of going to Jerusalem. If you're going to overturn the religious hierarchy, why not go there? He was declaring war on the spirit realm first. First there, and then out in the wilderness. And Doug, as you pointed out, I've not written about this because I don't want to steal your thunder if you want to put this in one of your books, but pointing out that in Greek, the word eremos may be etymologically linked. We may have mentioned this on a previous program.
Yeah, we have.
Etymologically connected to Hermon, or harem, meaning under the banner.
Coming out with that in the new Dragon book. So
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that whole region there, as Judd would say, is pregnant with meaning. When you just look at the landscape. A fellow that I've quoted a couple times, would love to meet him someday, the fellow who led the survey of the Golan Heights about 10 years ago now. Moshe Hartal wrote that we can no longer call them dolmen fields anymore, these clusters of dolmens, because they don't know where one ends and another one begins. Wow. The Golan Heights, ancient Bashan, is for all intents and purposes one giant dolmen field. It's a giant necropolis, a giant monument to the dead, and the people in Jesus' day knew it.
And the largest one on planet Earth that we know about.
Yeah. According to Mike Freakman in his dissertation, about 5,600 total just on the Golan, and again another 1,100 on either side of the Jordan Valley, the Hula Valley, between Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee. What's another interesting thing, and this is neither here nor there, but I just find it fascinating, that the biggest cluster of dolmens anywhere in Israel or Jordan. 1,500 of them found at the base of the Tal or the Tel, the hill, which was the site of ancient Sodom across from Jericho.
Wow.
So what was going on there that required that city to be destroyed? We think perhaps another cult trying to reach into the netherworld. When you look at the etymology of Baal Peor, that word, second word Peor, derives from a Hebrew root that means cleft or gap or opening, meaning in the context opening to the netherworld. And when you look at Psalm 106, verse 28, it wasn't what was going there. The reason the Israelites were afflicted with a plague that killed 24,000 of them there before Phinehas got stabby with the young Israelite prince and the Midianite princess wasn't because the two of them were doing some sort of fertility ritual in the sight of Moses and all Israel. It was because, according to the psalmist writing 400 years later, they were eating sacrifices offered to the dead. So this idea of reaching out to the spirit realm. One of the other things I found, there's a really interesting book I can recommend. And if you've got Logos Bible software, it's available from Faith Life. You can add it to your Logos subscription. It's called The Cult of Molech, a reassessment by George Heider, Heider. And in fact,
I actually have that in my library, believe it or not.
His name is so similar to Mike Heiser that one of my footnotes got messed up in the previous book because they assumed I meant Heiser when I was citing Heider. But Heider noted that in Leviticus 18, the condemnation of the cult of Molech and sacrificing children to Molech, burning them in fire, was connected to consulting with necromancers and with mediums. In other words, this practice of trying to solicit information from the spirit realm by consulting with spirits, by talking to the dead, often involved the sacrifice of children to Molech. So it's a much darker practice. It's not just, getting out the Ouija board and trying to talk. There's a very dark connection with talking to these spirits that isn't apparent, but Heider documents it and shows it. And it's like, okay. And yet the Phoenicians, the Amorites, were engaged in this practice well into the Christian era, as you see at Phoenician sites at Carthage, on the islands of Sicily and Sardinia, and the Pozzo Moro Mausoleum, this really horrific inscription that's at the museum in Madrid, Spain now, showing reptilian-like monsters that are consuming bowls of food, and you can see in the bowls what looks like little tiny hands and feet sticking out. It's like they're eating babies. And Heider said, he wrote in the book that archaeologists have been trying to explain that away for generations, but he said, no, it is what it looks like. The Phoenicians were sacrificing children, and these were the deities to which the children were being sacrificed.
Wow. Now, Derek, one of the other things that kind of stuck out to me as I was reading it was you do seem to diverge a little bit from, I think, the typical viewpoint of Nephilim, Anakim, Rephaim, all that connection. And I don't know to what degree, but it seemed like you seemed to mention that, and I want you to go into the Rephaim because that's sort of the focus of who they're contacting. But there's this notion of the Anakim used interchangeably with the Rephaim in the physical clans and stuff. And you seem to downplay the gigantism.
Yeah.
Is that something that you no longer really hold to, or is there a modification on your understanding of how the Anakim were connected to the Nephilim?
No, our working theory is still that the Anakim, like the neighboring Canaanites, Philistines, that we know from their texts, venerated the spirits of the Rephaim. The Rephaim were clearly physical tribes in the time of Abraham. We see in the War of Nine Kings in Genesis 14 that the kings from the east had to fight against the Rephaim, several battles in the east side of the river, the Transjordan. By the time of Moses, which is 400 years later, if you follow biblical chronology, some would say 215 years later. Either way, centuries later, by the time of Moses and the Israelites, the only Rephaim left were Og, who was described as the last of the remnant of the Rephaim. Now, the Anakim, who were apparently the last, or were counted as Rephaim in the book of Joshua, it's not clear what exactly that means. My belief is that probably means they also were worshiping these demigod spirits. And we know that I'm reading a book now. In fact, I think I may have sent you guys a note about this. I've got it right here. It's one that Mike brought to one of Judd's Sons of God Giants of Old conferences, called The Sea Peoples in the Bible by Othniel Margarleth. It's out of print, but I found a copy on eBay and managed to get it for a reasonable price. He agrees with another scholar whose name I'm going to forget now. Anyway, argues that the Anakim were probably from the Aegean, that the Anak, which is the root word, does not mean long neck. I mean, that's a close approximation to what the word in Hebrew means. But he argued, is it Lloyd Bailey? I think maybe the scholar's name. Anyway, argued that the word Anak comes from a primitive Greek word, wanax, meaning high king or hereditary ruler, as distinguished from the Basilia, who were like the regional kings. So in the Trojan War, Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks, was the wanax, and Odysseus and the other guys were Basilia. Therein lies the difference. So anyway, the Anakim were clearly the objective of Joshua and the Israelites. If you read the conclusion of the war, summarized in Joshua 11, beginning in verse 21, that he came and he cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Judah and the hill country of Israel. There were none left except in Gaza and in Gath and in Ashdod, which is the Philistine territories, and the Philistines were also from the Aegean world, probably related to the Greeks, if not Proto-Greek themselves. So when we get to that description in 2 Samuel 21, where David and his men are going up against Ishvi ben Ov and the other Philistine giants, where they're described as descendants of the Rapha, or descended from the giant, or descended from the giants, it's assumed that these guys were as huge as Goliath. And I have changed my mind a bit, by the way, on the height of Goliath. He probably was in the vicinity of 8 foot tall. But the word translated descendant in 2 Samuel 21 does not mean literal genetic blood descendant. The word is yalid in Hebrew, and it means one who's a member of a group into which one has been consecrated or initiated. And this is based on the work of a scholar named Conrad LaRue, who wrote that they were probably members of an elite warrior cult. So even though they were of large stature, and Sharon, who's got the degree in molecular biology with the emphasis in genetics, argues that this could have been achieved with epigenetics through rituals rather than through somehow trying to explain how the Nephilim returned after the flood of Noah. The point is that they were venerating the spirits of the giants, the Ov being a key clue here. And I cite you in, I think, several books now as being the one to kind of open this clue up there. Ishvi ben Ov, son of the Ov, son of the owner of a ritual pit, son of a woman who was summoning spirits from the netherworld. These guys were worshiping these demonic spirits. I think the closest modern equivalent, or relatively modern, would be like the Viking berserkers, who were so insanely violent on the battlefield they appeared not to feel heat, cold, pain, but they were also so out of control they would slaughter their own men as well, which is why the Vikings agreed. The Viking kings got together, the chiefs, and said, look, after about 100 years of using berserkers, let's not use them anymore. They're insane. We can't control them. I think that's what we're looking at with the perhaps the Anakim who were descended from the Nephilim. You know, they were Yelid. They were a member of a group that venerated or were initiated into a cult that venerated those guys. And we know this practice continued down into the Greek world. You mentioned the scholar Amar Anus earlier, Brian. One of the papers that really opened my eyes, he wrote back in 1999, titled, "Were There Greek Rephaim?" And he showed that the word for the demigods of old, used by Homer and Hesiod, derives from the same Semitic root word from which we get Rephaim. The Greeks knew who Hercules was. He was one of them. So the giants that Jesus was doing, I mean, the demons Jesus was doing battle with, those were the spirits of those giants, according to Hesiod, rather. And as we talked before, this was the belief of the early church and Jews of Jesus' day. They understood where those things came from. And again, the Greeks and the Romans continued the practice. Ironically, it was Augustine who convinced the church to change to the sons of Seth view. The Sethite view of Genesis 6 is also the one who brought the veneration of saints, the righteous who had gone on before, because they could intercede for us in this life. He just Christianized the practice of venerating the Rephaim.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is very, very interesting. I suppose we're coming close to the end of how long we usually go. Derek, how would you relate your book, especially the introduction with AI and stuff like that? I'm really interested in where you'll take this. I think this is kind of the practical question that we don't do good at practical because we're all nerdy, theology people. We don't really care about that, but I suppose some of the listeners do. How would you relate the stuff that you're writing in the book to the introduction and the AI stuff and what's happening in our day from your point of view?
Yeah, and I got to give Sharon credit because she's the one who wrote the introduction, which was a speculative story about an AI that goes sentient, and she very cleverly came up with an acronym to describe the operating system, the Kinetically Responsive Overseer and Neurogenerative Operating System, or
That was great.
Chronos.
That's genius, man. It totally
Yeah.
is.
Well, my dad
Chronos.
used to tell me, son, you married up. Chronos, which is just another name for this entity. Saturn, El, Dagon, Molech, Shemiyaza, same entity. The argument is that as Christians, we understand, here's the connection, that the human mind, which is a bioelectrical thinking machine, might likewise be, we know it can be overwhelmed by an outside force, a demon, through oppression, through influence, or just outright possession. Why couldn't an electromechanical, if you will, thinking machine likewise be overwhelmed and taken over by an external force? The fact is that researchers in the field of artificial intelligence don't really know what's going on inside the neural networks that they create, these black boxes. They call them black boxes precisely because they don't know what's going on inside.
That right there, that's a crazy thing that you just said.
Yeah.
Like
They don't know.
Yeah, I just heard
And it's
something
working?
recently about how none of these people care about any kind of like defensive posture towards AI that they're creating. They're so hell-bent on creating AI and having the best one out there that they couldn't care less. It's like every dystopian sci-fi AI thing that we've ever seen in movies is right before us. It's
a couple of
wild.
times.
And what you just said, I think, completely plays into that.
And I know we put this out there, Sharon and I, when we did Sci Friday, and we had people pushing back on us, said, no, just because you don't know how it works doesn't mean they don't know how. No, I'm sorry. I've interviewed an expert in the field of artificial intelligence, Dr. Hugo de Garis, who coined the term gigadeath to refer to what he expects to happen later in the 21st century as people who are hell-bent, and I mean that, use that word deliberately, on achieving artificial intelligence and artificial super intelligence. And those of us are saying, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right here. he believes there will be a war between these two groups. Dr. DeGaris was working at the Artificial Brain Institute of Xiamen University in China. He is Spaniard by ethnicity, was raised in Australia, was working in China, and he told me flat out, we were doing great engineering, but terrible science because we don't know why it would return the results it did. If we didn't get the results we wanted, we would tweak the input until we got the results that we wanted. But we don't know what's happening inside the neural network, inside the black box. So no, it's not that Derek Gilbert, a layperson, doesn't know what's going on. It's the guys who are building these things don't know what's happening inside those black boxes.
Great
and when
engineering.
you hear these,
go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, no, great
Cowbell.
engineering, but terrible
Cowbell,
science.
Cowbell. I was going to say great engineering, bad science. That's basically the tagline for all of our all the DoD contracts and the military-industrial complex stuff that what little we've been privy to.
Absolutely. So when you start seeing these stories, and in fact, I just talked about one for Skywatch TV this past week about a growing trend of people who are convinced that the chatbot that they're interacting with, whether it's ChatGPT or some other, has convinced them that they are God, or that through the bot, they are communicating with angels or with God. And this is causing marriages to break up. There are people online who are now running Instagram channels where they're giving readings from the Akashic records, which is a new age concept that all the sum of human knowledge exists out there in the ether if you can just tap into it. This guy's claiming to do it, and he's using an AI chatbot to do it. There are kids who've been told, hey, you have no worth. You might or come join me. You can join me in the ether if you just got to be careful because of algorithms here. Unalive yourself. I think we may already be seeing the beginning of this. And I don't want to be too spectacular without evidence here, but some of these bots are giving answers that are clearly anti-human, inhuman, and may not be coming from. I seriously doubt that the guys who programmed the systems and developed the AIs, developed these neural networks, are programming them in this way. So anyway, that's why we included a chapter in the book at the beginning to set this up before going into all the history. And then we come back to the future and what role artificial intelligence may play in the ongoing rebellion of the principalities and powers against our Creator, and how it's going to draw people into these religions as people are finding it easier to believe in the answers they're getting through an app on their phone than they're getting in the Word of God. So, the gates of hell, not just a physical portal at one spot at the base of Mount Hermon. It can be anywhere you are if you open yourself up to it.
All right.
Fitting conclusion, I might add,
For sure.
Yeah.
for the talk.
Well, thank you, fellas, for allowing me to ramble on and blather. This is a subject we feel strongly about, as you can tell, Sharon and me both. But it all fits together when you start seeing the big picture. And the older you get, hopefully comes a little wisdom, and we start to see the picture a little more clearly. Dr. Judd Burton, Brian Godawa, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Iron and Myth for this month. We'll be back again next month, and we hope you join us. You'll find links to the websites for Dr. Judd Burton, Brian Godawa, and Doug Van Dorn in the notes below, whether you're watching or listening to this program. And I'll be back again next month for another episode of Iron and Myth here on A View from the Bunker. Coming up, how does Whoopi Goldberg still have a job? just asking. I'm curious, not asking for a friend. I genuinely want to know because she's once again has said something so incredibly uninformed for somebody who's 69 years old that you just wonder if the people watching The View are just hate watching to see what dumb thing she or Joy Behar will say next. We'll talk about that, plus some thoughts on the Iran-Israel war and whether the United States should get involved. That, plus how this may affect our upcoming tour of Israel in October as A View from the Bunker continues.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can support the ministry of Skywatch TV and our continued efforts to share the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the four corners of the world and receive your very own copy of this incredible masterpiece when you order the Gates of Hell Ultimate Collection. Not only does this incredible special offer include Derek and Sharon Gilbert's new book, The Gates of Hell, Unlocking the Ganymede Code and the Demonic Portals of Mount Hermon and the United States Capitol, but it also includes the best-selling books Veneration, Unveiling the Ancient Realms of Demonic Kings and Satan's Battle Plan for Armageddon, and The Second Coming of Saturn, The Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the Return of the Watchers by Derek and Sharon Gilbert. Veneration uncovers how the ancient giants known as the Rephaim influenced biblical beliefs, leading to the corruption of God's people and their eventual return to fight at Armageddon alongside the Antichrist. The Second Coming of Saturn reveals a dark prophecy with the 2020 conjunction marking the return of the ancient god whose reign will bring a hellish golden age as foretold in occult symbols and Bible prophecy. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $60. Yours now for your donation of only $40, which includes free shipping to all U.S. orders. So don't delay. You can support the ministry of Skywatch TV and help us continue spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ right now by scanning the QR code on your screen using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special opportunity. Visit us at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the Gates of Hell Ultimate Collection now.
Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net. That's our main website. Subscribe there and or go to any one of our other locations where you can find us on the interwebs, social media on X. That's at View from Bunker. My personal account at Derek Gilbert or at @GilbertHouse_TV. You'll also find us on Facebook, the View from the Bunker page there. Give us a like, follow us there. Truth Social, Gab at Derek P. Gilbert. And our YouTube channel is at Gilbert House, where we encourage you to subscribe, share, click the bell for notifications, leave your comments below, hit the like button, but then please download our free mobile app, because that guarantees you will not ever be cut off from us. We will not be canceled from our own app. You'll find a link to that at the website, vftb.net. Check the top menu bar or go to gilberthouse.org/app, gilberthouse.org/app. Also, please, if you would, subscribe to our Telegram channel. You'll find us there at View from the Bunker. That's the name of the channel. Share a lot of news items there. And our Substack account, where we're serving up a lot of what we do. Basically unraveling Revelation, the Bible's greatest mysteries, this program, Iron and Myth, and articles, free excerpts from our books. We're going through and posting 3 of those a week. You'll find all of that at gilberthouse.substack.com. That's gilberthouse.substack.com. Well, on The View this past week, Whoopi Goldberg, who is old enough to know better, and even if she's not, she's got producers and production assistants and researchers who should be able to tell her that life in the United States is different than it is in Iran. But The View is not where you go for informed geopolitical commentary. It's basically 5 women sitting around sharing half-informed opinions, which are based on their feels. And because of that, it is where a lot of YouTube content creators are finding content these days. This show is not one of those. I will not show you excerpts of The View. You can find those all over the web. Joey Behar will say something, or Whoopi Goldberg will say something, or Sonny Hostin will say something that is just so incredibly hateful or uninformed that you just can't let it go. And at least in this case, this is one of those times. This past week, there was an argument between Whoopi and co-host Alyssa Farah Griffin, who were debating the course of action that the United States should or should not take in Iran vis-a-vis the war between Israel and Iran. Again, as I say, this is not where you go to get informed geopolitical commentary on world situations like this. And Whoopi, age 69, bearing in mind that she, as a black woman in America, is, I don't know what her net worth is, but I imagine she's getting paid in the millions of dollars per year to host a daily network television program. So she's doing all right for herself in a country that is ostensibly institutionally racist. But she argued that life in America is just as bad as it is in Iran. In other words, we, or depending on the level of melanin in your skin, are just as oppressed in the United States as the Iranian people are living under Ayatollah Khamenei. As I say, not the place to go for informed commentary. Now, Alyssa Farah Griffin pushed back on that and say, let's just remember the Iranians literally throw gay people off buildings. They don't adhere to basic human rights or international law. Now, I don't know if Griffin was any more informed than Goldberg, but it's, again, not the place you go for informed geopolitical commentary or discussion. Well, Whoopi pushed back and said, let's not do that, because if we start with that, we have been known in this country to tie gay folks to the car, and adding that the United States used to just keep hanging black people. I don't know if Whoopi's noticed, but again, at the age of 69, I would hope that she's noticed that these kind of things don't happen in the United States anymore. Now, just as an aside, by the way, there was a video posted to X, formerly Twitter, here just within the last few hours as I'm recording this, that purportedly shows scenes from Tehran recorded on May 18th, just a few days ago. That would be Thursday of this past week. And things look pretty modern. I mean, I'll be honest, I was a little surprised. People wearing Western clothing, women wearing Western clothing, not wearing the required gear. But, not the kind of thing you would expect to see in the news over here if we've learned nothing from the Trump era in American politics. And I should know better because I've been in the mainstream media. Started in the mainstream media when I was still in college in 1980. So I should know better. But this was the point that was being made by the person who posted the video was that life in Tehran is not what we in the West think it is. Okay, maybe true. I don't know. I don't have a way to verify that at the moment. The other takeaway for me, though, was that if this video was in fact shot in Tehran last Thursday, showing people in Western dress, going to cafes, going to modern-looking malls, going about their business, the takeaway for me was that these people did not look in the least bit concerned about becoming the victims of an Israeli airstrike. Unlike the people in Tel Aviv and Haifa and Beersheba in recent days, including a mosque, by the way, in Haifa that was hit with a strike on Saturday. So I digress, as an aside. Anyway, Whoopi Goldberg just commenting that life in America is just as bad as it is in Iran under the theocracy of a very conservative interpretation of Islam. Bless her pointy little head. Just the latest in a long line of comments from Whoopi Goldberg that make you just go, she's just saying stuff to get attention, apparently. I don't know what the ratings are for The View, but you got to imagine that a lot of people watching The View these days are just watching to see what she or Joy Behar are going to say next. Well, should the United States get involved in this conflict? I think there's a difference here. I don't think President Trump is actively considering sending United States soldiers to land in Tehran and try to take over the country. That would be foolish. Iran is a country of 90 million people. That's not something that would serve any American foreign policy. What President Trump has said, and I agree with this, is that he wants deterrent. He does not want a nuclear weapon in the hands of this theocratic regime led by Ayatollah Khamenei. It's just not Now, would that be a threat to the United States? No, not immediately. But if you've done any reading at all on the history of Islam and its relations with the rest of the world, it's their goal, ultimately, to convert the entire world at the point of a scimitar, or else. So in the Middle East, you've got a couple of different kinds of regimes. You've got the conservative Islamic regimes, which tend to be the monarchies, like Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf states, and Jordan. They're happy with the status quo. They don't want people rocking the boat. We've been to Jordan 3 times and found the people there to be very friendly to Westerners. Yeah, I've got some friends who will not go to Jordan because it's a majority Muslim country, but we found that the people there are very proud of their country, very proud of showing off the archaeology there, even though much of it is relates to the history of the Bible, the history of the Jewish people, and the history of Christians. I mean, the Madaba map in a Byzantine-era church in Madaba, south of Amman, Jordan. Very proud of that and very happy to share their nation with other people. Then, on the other side of the coin, besides the conservative, the monarchies, which are not necessarily promoting an aggressive form, a violent form of Islam, you've got the theocracy like, Iran. And whatever may come of Syria. We don't know yet what al-Shara, formerly al-Jalani, in Syria is going to do yet. If there's any positive from the transition of power there from Bashar al-Assad to HTS, the outgrowth of al-Qaeda, it's that they have severed the Shia crescent that the Ayatollahs were building from Tehran to Beirut. And they have severed the transition or the transit routes for weapons from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that's a good thing. Now, how will this play out long term in the relationship between this government in Damascus and Israel and the rest of the world? Don't know. But at least for now, that seems to be a good thing. What the United States is looking for, I think, in trying to guess what President Trump is thinking, is to deter, to eliminate the capability of Iran to build a nuclear device. And I am on board with this idea. Now, is this the reason, the actual reason that Israel launched its first airstrikes on Friday the 13th? That, again, is an open question. I don't know. That's the reason that's given by Israel and the IDF. But remember, this is not a war that began on Friday the 13th of June. This is a war that began, in fact, didn't even begin on October 7th of 2023. This is the continuation of a long, low-grade conflict that's been ongoing for decades. Hamas has been launching strikes into Israel, a mortar here, missile there, drone here, launching these incendiary balloons to burn the crops of Israelis in the southern part of the country. Hezbollah likewise launching, new homes in Israel have to be built with bomb shelters inside. We in the United States don't have any frame of reference for that. When we visited the communities that had been attacked on October 7th, last May, in Sderot, which is at its closest point about half a mile from the border fence with Gaza, the children's playgrounds have playground equipment made of reinforced concrete so that the kids know, when a siren goes off, they have to run to get inside the Smurf tree or the giant caterpillar or whatever, and then stay away from the openings, because they are built to withstand these rocket hits or these mortar hits coming from across the border in Gaza. Would we Americans allow our children and our grandchildren to be raised that way? And allow the rest of the world to tell us, you need to be measured in your response. You need to be proportionate in your response. I tend to think not. But anyway, this conflict has been ongoing for a long time. Hezbollah was formed back in 1982 as a result of Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon. But Israel had invaded Lebanon because the Palestine Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat and his bunch, had been using Lebanon as a base to attack into Israel. And this was after the PLO had been kicked out of Jordan in 1979, as Black September, where the Jordanians got wind of a plot by the PLO to try to overthrow King Hussein. And the Jordanians weren't having any of that. So the Jordanian army went to war against the PLO, ran them out of the country. They set up shop in southern Lebanon, which prompted Israel's invasion. Hezbollah was formed in response to that. Remember that the main financial and military backer of both Hezbollah and Hamas was Iran. And so by continuing what happened October 7th with the war, what began on October 7th, Israel's attack into Iran is basically trying to cut the head off the snake, because Iran has been using its proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza to attack, to poke at Israel. And Israel, by the way, Iran has also been trying to destabilize King Abdullah of Jordan through Fifth Column inside Jordan, which is why the Jordanians have been shooting down drones and missiles coming from Iran across its airspace to Israel. The Jordanians are no friends of the Ayatollahs. So should the United States get involved? As I'm recording this on Saturday, the 21st of June, and by the way, happy summer, the United States Air Force has moved the B-2 Spirit bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base near Kansas City, just a few hours north of us here in Missouri, to either Diego Garcia or Guam. I don't know for sure at this point where they have gone, but they were accompanied by 8 KC-135s. I believe that's the designation for the tankers that will refuel the planes. And according to reports, those B-2s were refueled immediately after taking off, which means they've got a full load of armaments. Now, were they being sent as a message to Ayatollah Khamenei? Hey, we're serious. We're not going to bomb you today, but yeah, I think if anything is in the cards, it is that the United States will help take out the last remaining nuclear development facility in Iran. Now, there are a couple of op-ed pieces that our friend Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis has written, and both are published at Fox News, foxnews.com. In fact, I'll put links in the notes below to these op-ed pieces, because on the surface, they almost appear contradictory. And I know Bob is a very clear thinker, and so he's got reasons for posting what he has posted. And he is an independent thinker, which, speculating here, he's not said anything to me, so please don't misread this, speculating that this may not have been well received by his superior officers when he was active duty military. He is retired military. He is now a consultant to the Pentagon. The op-ed piece that was published just this morning, June 21st, don't be misled, Iran isn't days away from a nuclear bomb. Now, when Benjamin Netanyahu first began talking about this several weeks ago, that the time is now to put a stop to this, again, is it that Iran is actually on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon? Netanyahu has been saying this for more than 20 years. When I was in secular talk radio, hosting a daily political talk show on a conservative talk station, Sean Hannity in the afternoon, Bill O'Reilly was still doing daily radio on our station at the time. Michael Savage was on our station, Neil Bortz, and then me in the afternoon. I remember then we were hearing that Iran was just months away from a nuclear weapon, and we need to put a stop to it. I suspect that Benjamin Netanyahu, who is very much a patriot, feels the weight of history on his shoulders when it comes to these decisions, and recognizing that Iran, unlike Iraq, Saddam Hussein, unlike other regimes in the Middle East, being a theocracy, is not governed by the same sorts of political considerations that other world leaders are. Trump can negotiate with, say, Xi of China or Putin of Russia, because there are things that they're doing that are in their best interests and in their nation's best interests. And Trump can see if he can cut a deal other nations can try to cut deals with them as well, based on mutual self-interest or exchanging. Okay, we'll give you this if you give us that sort of thing. Theocrats who believe, especially in a fundamentalist, by which I mean 7th century, Mohammedan interpretation of Islam, may not be swayed by that. They don't really care about trade deals as much as they care about preparing the way for the Mahdi. I know that according to Shiite theology, they are not supposed to even try to wage global jihad before the Mahdi returns, and he will return when he returns, not 1 minute sooner. There's nothing that you can do to try to make that happen any faster, unlike the Sunnis, who believe that they can jumpstart the apocalypse. But the mullahs, the ayatollahs, are getting old. They're in their 70s and 80s now, and they may feel that this is their last, maybe only, opportunity to see the Mahdi in the flesh. So they may not be averse to using a nuclear weapon. Probably not at Jerusalem, because that's where the Mahdi is supposed to receive his crown from Isa, their conception of Jesus, but maybe Tel Aviv. That might be okay. Don't know. I'm not an expert in these things, trying to just base it on what little bit of reading I've done on Islamic eschatology, Islamic history, and so forth. Getting back to Netanyahu, it's possible that what he's been saying is based on that consideration, that he knows that the theocracy in Iran, unless it is changed somehow, unless there is regime change and a return to a more secular government, that Israel will always be at risk. So that may be what's behind Netanyahu's assessment. Having said that, just recently, the International Atomic Energy Agency issued a report saying that Iran has developed enough 60% pure uranium, which is fairly close to the 90% purity they need to develop the weapons. And they've got enough of this at 60% purity to develop 10 nuclear weapons. And by the way, where that material is now, nobody seems to know. The IAEA doesn't know. But that report did say that the material has gone missing, and that their inspectors have been prevented from getting into areas that they're supposed to be allowed to keep tabs on Iran's nuclear program. Now, that report was used by media of different nations and of different political preferences to make claims that ranged from the IAEA says that Iran is about to develop a nuclear weapon. That was the Times of Israel, which is a fairly liberal news outlet, to Al Jazeera saying no evidence that Iran is about to develop a nuclear weapon. So basically, the IAEA managed to make everybody unhappy by not saying anything specifically one way or the other than they've got enough 60% pure uranium to develop 10 weapons, which has now gone missing, and nobody seems to know where it is. Or at least if the Iranians know, they're not telling anybody. But anyway, Colonel McGinnis said Iran is not days away from a nuclear weapon, and he spells out exactly what is needed for construction of a nuclear weapon. Just having the uranium doesn't mean that you're about to have a nuclear weapon. You also need very high-tech machining in order to shape the uranium into a flawless sphere. You need carefully placed charges that must detonate simultaneously, which requires precisely synchronized trigger mechanisms and delivery systems that can put the weapon on target. And there's no evidence yet that Iran has those capabilities yet. They've shown the ability to enrich the uranium, but beyond that, we just don't know. Now, just a week or so ago, June 17th, not even a week ago, just earlier this week, Wednesday, Colonel McGinnis wrote this other op-ed piece titled, "Why U.S. Must Destroy Iran's Fordow Nuclear Facility Now." This is the facility that is underneath Mount Alvand, near the religious city of Qom, Qom, in the northeast of Israel, I believe, northeast of Iran, I believe. I should know where that is, and forgive me, I don't. But Israeli intelligence has identified that as probably the heart of the atomic weapons effort. This is a facility that enriches uranium, but because of its location underneath a mountain, Israel doesn't have the weaponry to take it out. They've taken out the Natanz facility, other facilities at Esfahan, and Parthian research facilities devoted to nuclear weapons research. But Fordow is a facility that's beneath about 250 feet of rock. And so the B-2 bombers and the bunker busters, so-called bunker busters, that the United States possesses would be needed to take them out. And there's some conflicting information as to whether or not those bunker busters would actually be successful in getting through the mountain and getting at this facility. So is that contradictory to what Colonel McGinnis published today, which was that no, Iran is not days away. His conclusion in the article today, and I think this is wise, concluding the article, he writes, none of this downplays the threat Iran poses. The regime's support for proxy militias, its ballistic missile program, and its pattern of obstructing IAEA inspections are deeply troubling. But deterrence and diplomacy, not preemptive war, must be the first response. The United States retains a full suite of tools: cyber operations, regional missile defense, economic sanctions, and multilateral diplomacy. Military action should remain the final option, not the opening move. So, should we take out the Fordow facility? It would seem that if it's that important to the Iranian nuclear program, probably yes. But military action in the form of boots on the ground in Iran? No. And I don't think President Trump's supporters would stick with him should he make that decision. I don't think he will. But the bottom line is, if you look at the history of Islam, especially in its most conservative, most fundamental forms, again, 7th century interpretation of the teachings of Muhammad as he lived it out and as his immediate successors lived it out. Remember that in the 100 years after Muhammad died, the armies of Islam conquered all of the Middle East, half of what is now Turkey, all of North Africa, all of Spain, were making inroads into Persia and Afghanistan, and were halfway across France before Charles Martel turned them back in Europe. Now, again, Shia theology is that they're not supposed to try to wage global jihad until Mahdi returns, and they cannot do anything to prompt him to return. But as our friend Ali Siadatan has said, Persian by birth, Iranian by birth, fled the country with his family in 1979 as a boy after the Islamic Revolution. The Ayatollahs may see this as their one chance to try to move things along while they're still in control, because they understand that the young people of Iran are not in their corner. The regime is very unpopular with under 25s, which is the biggest demographic segment in Iran, and so they're looking at this as a way of trying to hang on to their power, their jobs, if you will. Just pray that cooler heads prevail and understand, know as Christians that God has foreseen all of this. And regardless of how you feel about Benjamin Netanyahu or the government of Israel or even the Jewish people, the 1,400-year history of Islam suggests that it does need to be contained, and that Israel just happens to be, because of it's the location of God's Mount of Assembly, Yes, Psalm 132, verses 12 and 13, God said, "This is where he will dwell forever, for he has desired it." Israel just happens to be on the front line of this religious and civilizational struggle. But it won't stop there. Just look at the no-go zones in Europe right now. Without some pushback from the West, it will continue. And by the way, the reason the West is called the West is because that's what was left of Christendom by the time the 8th century rolled around. In other words, Islam had conquered the East. We got a couple of things coming up here in July. We will be in Ohio at the Go Therefore conference, Sharon and I, along with our friend Joe Artis Horn from Skywatch TV. We hope you can join us there. This will be a wonderful gathering as it's almost like the two conferences we got coming up, both like family reunions as we get together with people that we've known for more than a decade now, and many of the people who come to these conferences likewise are people that we've come to know from seeing them at event after event. Carl Gallups will be with us as well in Ohio. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Vicki Joy Anderson, also joining us from here in the Ozarks. David Heavener, Tom Dunn, Pastor Casper McLeod, Dr. Igal German, the founder of the International Biblical Apologetics Association, has been a guest on this program. Dr. Mike Spalding will be there, and then Sharon and I both speaking as well. This will be July 25th and 26th in Brookville, Ohio at the Harvest Revival Center. You can go in person, you can stream it on the web, or you can buy a dual ticket for the live event and then get a real discount on the streaming, so that if you have to leave at one point or you want to show a presentation to your home church or something like that after the fact, then you've got access to the video on demand afterwards. More information on that at gothereforeconference.com. That's gothereforeconference.com. And then in August, we have a chance to welcome you to the Ozarks. It's the Remnant Rising Conference in Springfield, Missouri, August 22nd through 24th. This will be at the Oasis Hotel and Conference Center. Sharon and I will be there along with all of our colleagues from Skywatch TV, Joe Artis Horn, Donna Howell, Nita Horn, and just added to the speakers list, Pastor Carl Gallups, Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat. They will be there. In addition, Jamie Walden, Paul Begley, Heidi Begley, Tracy Tennant, Vicki Joy Anderson, Kevin Shipp, who holds the honor of being one of 3 programs of this podcast to get yanked for violating community standards, if you know what I mean, which is why we suggest you get our app. Pastor Casper McLeod and Renee Truex both added to the event, and they will be playing some praise and worship music as well. And they've got a new album out, by the way, which is just wonderful. More information on the live event and the streaming at hearthewatchmen.com. But wait, there's more. Save $20 by using the promo code GilbertHouse20. GilbertHouse20 saves you $20 at hearthewatchmen.com. Now, our tour of Israel, October 19th through 30th. Obviously, with a war on, things are complicated. We've got friends over there who are making their way back to the United States by way of Egypt. Dr. Scott Stripling, Shelley Neese, who's been a guest on this program. They were at the dig at Shiloh, which is on the list of places we intend to visit in October, God willing, because that's where the red heifers are, but also the history there is just fantastic. Obviously, with the Iranians firing missiles in the vicinity of Ben Gurion Airport, travel is difficult. So, how are things affected at this point? We honestly don't know. We're going to have to look at this, and if things continue beyond the next few weeks, the IDF assesses this will be another couple of 3 weeks at least if the U.S. doesn't get involved. But things have a way of not working out the way even the best laid plans of mice and men, as the old saying goes. If you put down your deposit, or if you've already put down your deposit for the tour to join Sharon and me and our special guest Carl Teichgrib, and we have to change the dates, and you cannot accommodate the new dates. If the new dates just don't work for you, you will get your deposit back. So there is no risk there. As of this point, we are not changing our dates, October 19th through 30th. But again, if things continue and they are not safe, we will not proceed in the face of incoming missile fire. But we are looking at dates. We've got dates, in fact. We'll talk about those in the weeks ahead. In next spring. And if we need to shift things back to then, to wait for things to calm down and to for the security situation to resolve. And again, if you've got deposits on the October dates, you can't take the new dates don't work. Again, Lipkin Tours will refund your money. More information at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel. That's gilberthouse.org/travel. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen, as the case may be. If you're watching, please, again, subscribe, share, click the bell for notifications, hit that like button. If you're listening, please know you can subscribe to this podcast at Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, wherever fine podcasts are sold. And please give our Facebook page a follow. Our announcer is the inimitable D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Good night, Oliver, wherever you are. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is A View from the Bunker.